Thank you. So if you missed it up front, we will be recording the event, so be careful of your dance moves. If you're more comfortable having your video off, you can do so, although I do like seeing you, especially those of you who are wearing sparkles. Welcome to this second sitting of the global book launch of Change Leader by Dr. Jen Frahm. It's really wonderful to have you all here, and thank you very much for making the time. Let me begin by acknowledging that I am hosting this event from the lands of the Turrbal people. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all join us from today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are participating in this event. I pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging, and their ongoing connections to the lands and the waters of our country. I am Julieanne Dimitrios, and I'm going to be your MC for this exciting session. I'm an organisational change manager based in Brisbane, and trust me, I've worked with a few leaders who could benefit from reading this book. Jen and I first connected in my first paid job in the 90s. I was a TV station receptionist, and Jen was an advertising copywriter and coordinator. We then circled back to working together in 2002 when Jen actually studied me for her PhD, as I'd gone into a career in change management by that point. In 2019, I actually took the honour of being the first graduate of the Agile Change Leadership Institute, which Jen is the co-founder of, and we've also got Lena with us here today. So here's what we're going to do today. Not only will you hear about the new book, Change Leader, but Jen has assembled an esteemed panel for you to hear more about change leadership. Our panel will share their leadership's insights with you and answer your change leadership questions. You're very welcome to submit questions in the chat at any time, and we will try to get through them. But before I introduce the panel, let me introduce you to the author of Change Leader, Dr. Jen Frahm. So Dr. Jen is an expert in organisational change. She doesn't like being highly praised, but she deserves it. She works with clients in multiple countries and coaches and nudges. And some people call her a thought leader, but from my perspective, she does more than that. She actually designs and delivers change that lasts. This is Jen's third book. And in my favourite review I've read so far of the book, and I think the author of the review, Gilbert, might be online today, it was described as the older sister to Conversations of Change. Dr. Jen, how are you feeling about today's book launch?
Oh, it's a bit of a big day. Thank you so much, Julieanne. And I think what I'm really struck by most is how big last year was, and what a price we all paid and are still paying. And I want to acknowledge that for you to show up, all of you to show up today, and the support I've received with the book. It's amazing, and it's quite incredible to receive that kind of support when, you know, it's been a really rough time for most people. So I'm feeling really proud. I'm feeling really happy, and I'm really excited with everybody who's come here today. It's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. So can you tell us a bit about how the book came about?
Yeah. Well, we've got Donna on the panel, and I'll let her tell a little bit about it as well. But the story is, I started writing this book probably about 2 years ago, in so much as I had the mind map and the chapters framed up. And then Brené Brown published Dare to Lead, and I went, crap, she's done it. Okay, let's just shelve that book. As Brené Brown is wont to do, actually. It's quite offensive. However, a chance conversation with Donna Hardman last year made me realise that there was certainly concepts in what I had wanted to write that, under this current context, in terms of the disruptive change that we were going through, that there would be merit in you know, birthing another book, as it were. So yeah.
Yeah, so I've read the book and I got so much value from it. And if you have also read the book, please share in the comments what your favourite parts about the book have been so far. One of the things that I really got value from the book were the tangible change actions that were in there. Jen, can you give us a little more insight into those change actions?
Yeah. So in the book, you'll find that I cover 33 topics, which for me were really, what do I think that leaders need most at the moment in terms of going forward and being able to continue to lead disruptive change? But some of you will know my background is as an academic, and I was a very short-lived academic. I didn't last that long because I actually really attach a lot of value to pragmatism and action. And so it wasn't enough just to share what the 33 topics would be about. What I wanted to do was to be able to offer people, 2 to 3 discrete, concrete actions that you could do next week in practice that would start making yourself a better leader. And so this tended to lend itself to what was really, an opportunity to start measuring yourself. If you thought about where you sat on each of these 33 topics right now, and then you did those 2 or 3 actions and put them into practice on a regular basis, how might you grow as a leader of change over time? So that was really what that was about.
Yeah, and one of the panelists in this morning's book launch really talked about how that was a bit of a kick, to have to go and do that. It wasn't just fodder and material that you could read. It was actually you were forced to do something with it. So I think that's great. I think another key thing for me about this book is how Jen collaborates so well with other people, and we're very fortunate to have some of those people on our panel today. So I'm going to introduce them shortly, but before I do that, I just want to point out that we've got a panel of experts here today who many have worked with lots of clients and different boards. They're not representing those clients and boards today. We have asked them today to give their personal opinions and personal experiences. So I will ask each panel member shortly to introduce themselves and in particular their relationship to Jen. So I'll start with Lena Ross, who co-wrote a section of Change Leader on having an agile mindset. Lena.
Yeah, thanks, Julieanne. Really happy to be here. Congratulations to the whole panel and, of course, to you, Jen. I'm Lena Ross, based in Melbourne, and I'm a change consultant with my own practice called Change Hacks, and more recently, the co-founder of the Agile Change Leadership Institute with Jen. But our history goes back many years. We met when we were both working at a large bank in Australia on separate projects. And one of our mutual colleagues said to me, you really need to meet Jen Frahm. You guys are going to have a lot to talk about. And I did meet Jen. We did have a lot to talk about. We continued to have lots to talk about, and hopefully we'll continue to have lots to talk about in the years to come. And as a result of that, when we both found out that we were writing books, our first books back in 2017, we decided to have a joint book launch, and Julieanne, Simon and Michelle were there and all played a big role on that fantastic night. So nice to see you again too, guys. And since then, we've collaborated on a number of partnerships, and it just made sense to kick off the Agile Change Leadership Institute when a lot of our thoughts converged in that direction. So here we are, decided to split a bar tab back in 2017, had a great night, and it continues. So really happy to be here. Thanks, Julieanne.
Thanks, Lena. So our next panel member is Donna Hardman, and she also contributed to Change Leader by writing the foreword. Donna.
Hi. I'm so excited. Like it just feels like we're partying. What an interesting way to do a book launch 2020 style. So thank you for allowing me to participate. Thank you, Jen, for allowing me to write the foreword. It was an absolute personal pleasure. So today I lead change conversations at a board table. So I'm a professional company director, and either through coaching or mentoring or as a member of the board, I champion the change conversation. In my executive career, I championed change through line roles, and as a consultant, I launched startup banks and did transformational change projects, etc., in financial services. One of which was in the Big Four bank, and I met Jen. I was the program director, and she was the change guru. And we started a conversation, and that conversation has run, I'd say, 20 years now, Jen. And it's been fabulous. I've never been more grateful to have Jen in my corner than I was in 2020, when the phone was ringing from some incredible change leaders who were raising issues with me, finance issues, fraud issues, people people that I just thought, you know, had it all under control were really challenged, and they were calling me. And I was having a tough year too. And so, you know, I thought, who am I going to call? Of course, you know, I called Jen and said, you know, hey, we're all having a moment, and you need to step up. What can you offer? And so Jen was very kindly offering tips and suggestions, and also being real, saying, you know, it's a tough year for me too, you know. Anyway, I said, well, you know, you better keep working on it, because we're going to need some help coming out of the end of this. And Change Leader was born. So yeah, very grateful to have met Jen 20 years ago, and even more grateful that we're great pals, and I'm still learning from Jen today.
Yeah, thanks, Donna. I think it's terrific that conversation's been continuing, and I hope it continues. And speaking of conversations, so we've got the gentleman who wrote the foreword of the Little Sister book, Conversations of Change. So Simon Terry, I think you're down in Melbourne today also, which I think it's chilly, somebody said.
It is a crisp day in Melbourne. So thanks, Julieanne. Look, it's so exciting to be here and to celebrate yet another great contribution from Jen. These books are, you know, certainly books I recommend to the executives I work with in change initiatives, because it's Jen's ability to distill and really and be practical and pragmatic that really, for me, has always been the benchmark. I've known Jen for almost 10 years. Was really excited that we've got to collaborate on a number of projects over that time period and done some interesting work together, including Jen being a part of our Change Network, which is Change Agents Worldwide. And so, you know, it's exciting to be here, and really pleased that this contribution's going out to so many people at a time when change is really on everyone's agenda, and couldn't be more important.
Thanks, Simon. Moving internationally now, we've got Adeline Lee up in Singapore. Adeline.
Thanks, Julieanne. Not sure about being international, but hi, everyone. So thanks, Jen, for inviting me to be on the panel. So how did I know Jen? So I worked with Jen when I was in Oricon, actually. What seems like ages ago. I think that was 2014, 2015. And we were working on the leadership development pathways and programs, and Jen was an external consultant. So what I remember of Jen was she was extremely insightful, very knowledgeable. She was always open to listening, and she was, more importantly, always a barrel of fun to work with. So that was my recollection of Jen. And since then, I have been actively stalking her on LinkedIn, which is how I got to know about all these things that she's been working on these days. So a bit about myself, I have been in HR for 15 years, and I'm currently working for INSEAD, which is the business management school, as the Associate Director of Talent Development. So this is great because it means that I have access to my colleagues and their knowledge, whom, like Jen, they are all thought leaders and really elites in their field of research in topics such as leadership, org behavior, strategy, economics, so on and so forth. So I'm really happy to be here, and I thank Jen for the opportunity.
Thanks, Adeline. And our final panel representative today is Michelle Redfern. And Michelle also wrote a segment in the book on what...
Oh, we've just had our MC's voice drop out.
We did. That's all right. Thanks, Julieanne. So wonderful to be here. So I hold similar memories to the other panelists, and there's one of the big four banks that anchors us, some of us together. So that's where I first met Jen, and we were colleagues. She was doing a whole bunch of stuff that intertwined with my whole bunch of stuff that I was doing. And look, it took really one 20-minute conversation for me to go, this is an interesting person, and I want to get to know her and do some more work with her. What I really appreciate about Jen is that she is forthright, pragmatic, and practical. And look, I value being forthright, practical, and pragmatic as well. But she is someone who is not afraid to challenge the status quo. And when it comes to change and leadership, that we need those people in the room for us to move our organisations forward, so that we keep maintaining our edge, our leading edge, and we keep evolving and innovating. So we need people like Jen in the room to help us think more deeply, think more broadly about the way we can do stuff better. So that's what I value about Jen. We've done a bit of stuff together. Jen helped me launch one of my research papers, and a little bit about me. So I escaped the corporate jungle, and I have my own practice in diversity and inclusion. But essentially, when people say, what do you do? Because I actually do a whole bunch of different stuff, but it's all anchored in two things. One, I fix the system, workplace systems and industry systems that prevent women and other underrepresented people from reaching their full potential in an organisation, which will prevent the organisation reaching its full potential. And the other side of the thing I do is I help women navigate the system until all of us fix it. So, and I have a ball doing that across business and sport. And Jen is always a very good sounding board, and someone that I often refer my clients through to when they want to navigate difficult change, some of the most difficult change that we see. So it's my absolute pleasure to honour you today, Jen, by being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That was a beautiful introduction. I like it. Jen is the navigator. I can see her, you know, and I couldn't agree more that we need people who are willing to stand up and actually speak through these issues. And I think if we can get more people to read this book, we actually have an opportunity to actually start to change the way leaders behave. So we're going to talk now about some of your insights into change leadership. And so I've got a couple of questions that I'd like to ask the panel. But as I mentioned earlier, feel free to drop any of your questions also into the chat. The first question, I'm going to throw it to Dr. Jen first, but it's really around what did we learn about leadership in 2020?
Gosh, I think there's a lot of things that we learnt last year. And sometimes it's really interesting, our ability to separate what we learnt from how we learnt it, in that it was so brutal, you know. I think what we learnt was that those leaders who had really invested in personal and professional development, and personal development is quite intentional there. They really, really excelled. However, those that had not invested, who thought that they'd skate through, they went through incredibly difficult times. And we often, you know, we use the phrase in terms of you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And I think by the time we got to the end of 2020, we had a lot of thirsty horses out there, you know, all of a sudden it had come home why they actually needed to invest in their ability to connect with people, to lead people, you know, what leading people actually was about. So that would be my take on it.
Yeah, someone from the panel, what did you learn? What do you think we learned about leadership in 2020? Who'd like to go first?
I'll jump in.
Lena, thanks.
Okay, so I think for me, there were two key things. One was leadership was disrupted. As Jen said, where they thought they may have had places to hide prior to 2020, even though we knew that it was a highly volatile and uncertain environment out there, the imperative wasn't as harsh as what it was when we had that imposed change through the pandemic. So the way we call it is we say the storm is the norm now. So prior to the pandemic, there were still some pockets you could hide and still let older ways of leading serve you. I think what became quite apparent was that those ways of leading no longer worked. And if you hadn't, as Jen said, built your capability and prepared yourself for that type of environment, it caught up with you. So for me, leadership was disrupted. I also think mindsets. I've probably got a bit of a lag here with time. I don't know why. Okay, so with the mindset disruption, this came up in the morning session as well. It takes a long time to deliver, and execute took a matter of weeks. So what happened with the mindset was we realised that we could let go of perfection. We could experiment more. We just didn't have the time to. We had to introduce things very, very quickly. So I think that disrupted the mindsets of leaders, and really probably a shift that was needed came around through a very unusual way. So that's what I think 2020 delivered to us and what we learnt about leadership in that time.
Yeah, thanks, Lena. I might throw it to you, Michelle, to ask that question about what do you think we learnt in 2020. But also there's a second question in the chat around, do you think that the different genders navigate change differently? Perhaps you can answer both of those concurrently.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Jeanette, for the question. I saw it. I thought, good. So what did we learn in 2020? I couldn't concur more with Lena and Jen that I think what we learned was that trust had to be at the core of so many, what we've always wanted as change leaders, and particularly in the work that I do around inclusion, equality and belonging in workplaces. We learned that our default position must be trust, because when we don't trust, as leaders, if we don't trust, we spend a lot of energy doing stuff that could be better spent on meeting the strategic and financial goals of the organisation. And the example I would give would be everyone was flung into their homes almost at the same time worldwide, as you know, in these kind of forums. And from a leader's perspective, those who'd relied on old leadership tropes and had not developed themselves and kept bringing their evolving as leaders were caught short, because what they relied on were old leadership practices and I want to see you because I don't trust you, and I want to see you there in my window and know that you're there doing the work. And for those organisations who navigated change, and there was not one organisation that wasn't navigating change, the leaders who had high trust and high accountability environments were able to navigate that change much more quickly than those that didn't. So again, I think even in the work I do, it all comes back to leadership. How, for me, it was around trust. That was the biggest word that came out of 2020. And to Jeanette's question, do different genders navigate change differently? Well, look, the short, easy answer would be, yeah, sure, because I can rely on very gendered stereotypes and things like that. Women are good at the soft stuff and the communications, men are good at this. But then I really want to challenge that, because I don't buy into, and apologies, I'm going to be binary now, but I don't buy into feminine and masculine leadership styles. What I buy into is, let's redefine leadership and say, what does a great leader need to do in an organisation to navigate difficult change, full stop, because it's VUCA. That is the characteristic of every single leader's workplace now: volatility, uncertainty, change, complexity and ambiguity. And for any leader, whether they're male, female, or don't identify, or non-binary, how might they keep evolving their skills so that they can navigate change through and with people more effectively? So, Jeanette, that's a bit of a non-answer, but I do get very bent out of shape when people say men do this and women do that. What I'd say is all of us need to look at our mindsets, because we all have them, about what role is assigned to what gender, and leadership is genderless. And how might we bring out the best? How might we engage and align the greatness in all people, and not rely on the very narrow definitions and narrow avatars of what a leader is? Charismatic, A-type personality, pale and male, and straight. So yeah, there you go.
So I'm giggling because Simon and I had a bit of a chuckle earlier before everyone came on, using those terms, pale and male. And I was actually going to throw the question that came in the chat to Simon while he's answering the what did we learn about leadership in 2020. Yeah. Maybe you can also think about what can we learn, or what can leaders or leading practitioners do to get rid of discriminatory workplace practices. And those discriminatory workplace practices can also apply to pale male people.
Yeah, absolutely, Julieanne. And so, look, I begin from a place very, very similar to Michelle's logic, and that trust is a major part of what I do, and working with leaders so that they understand their teams and that they invest in the capabilities that support trust, which is, I think, a really important call out. I think the other thing we've probably learned through 2020 is these high bandwidth conversations that we're having right now can be an illusion. We can think that we've explored the issues we need to explore, that we can think we've all seen each other face to face. But as we all know, some of us are sitting here texting other people in the background, responding to emails. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we've learned about fatigue, true engagement, depth of conversation. And so, look, to go to the point about how do we address the issues that we see in discriminatory work practices, and let's be clear, they're everywhere. This is not an issue that anyone can pretend they're clean on. Any organisation that's standing around saying they've got a perfect record needs to look at themselves. The first thing is, and I'm sure Michelle would agree with me on this, call it when you see it. Make sure you're standing up, you're describing what you expect as the standard, and you're, being an ally and intervening where there are problems. The second issue is we have to take the hard decisions about fixing systemic issues. Capability is one of them. People will not get to where we want them to get to unless we give them the support, the coaching, the mentoring and the development and the opportunities to prove what they can do. And we need to take the systemic barriers and blockages out of the way, whether that's the way we allow flexibility of work, whether that's the way we allow people to recognise that lives are complicated. I'm a dad who works from home and supports my kids to go to school and be picked up and managed, and I've got a kid home sick today. All of those things need to be an acceptable part of the work discourse, because if we gender the relationships, if we gender who can have flexibility, if we gender what career expectations are, we gender everything, and we're going to lose.
Yeah, that's really insightful, Simon. Thank you. Just while we're talking about, you mentioned capabilities before. There's a question that's come in around what capabilities actually support trust.
So from a perspective, and this is the kind of work Jen references, deeply in her work and in her books. It's the ability to engage people, to engage them in a vision of what they're capable of, to stretch their understanding of what they can do and how they can respond to environments, to coach them through that change and to support them and make them understand that you're there for their success. At the end of the day, trust is about alignment, but it's also about, can I rely on that person? Do I feel that there's enough transparency? Do they have the capability to do what they say they're going to do? And I think leaders sometimes are focused on the verbal performative parts of leadership. They're less focused on it's the hard stuff you do in the back room that no one notice. It's the bullets you take for the team. It's the way you look around corners and support and enable your team that build that capability. And they're the kinds of things Jen's book today is really calling out leaders to look to do.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I couldn't agree more. I'm going to throw next to Donna Hardman, because Donna actually sits on a number of boards. And so I guess that's some of the back rooms, I suppose, that, that really they do have to take some of the bullets sometimes. So Donna, tell me, what do you think leaders need, what we learned about leadership in 2020?
Well, first, I couldn't agree more with Michelle and Simon, in the sense that you needed to be match ready and you needed to have foundations of trust. I think, and I won't name the brands, but some of the work that I did, the teams were very much ready. And we had walked through fire in the years leading up to it and enabled us to pivot. So there was a particular audit and risk committee where, thankfully, actually, because this group were doing some seriously important work during COVID, and they were up against it. And the audit and risk team had earned the trust, and the secretary was able to pivot the team towards one of coaching and mentoring and supporting the team through really tough risk decisions through the year. And that was just fabulous. Another insight is the military have this term called OODA, where you observe, orient, decide and act. And it's all about she who can respond to change most quickly survives. and they train for it and they build capability for it, and they really drill. And so if I've learned nothing out of 2020, I realise that we're facing into permanent disruption. We are going to have to be match ready, and some of the most important conversations, chapter 7, I think, Jen, are to come. And if you want to participate in those conversations, you absolutely have to be match ready. So I quite like the OODA loop idea, and I think it can apply to many other of the organisations that I work with.
Yeah, thanks, Donna. I'm going to throw next to Adeline in Singapore, because Adeline, I understand your roles around talent development. So how do we get our people or our organisations, our leaders, to be more match ready?
How do we get our leaders to be more match ready?
Yeah.
I think we really need to help them to understand, the whole process of change and how they can go about doing it. Because for me, I think the biggest leadership lesson that we've learned really is, number one, VUCA is here and it's real, right? I think it's clearer more now so than ever that, what we encounter in our businesses, it's not controllable, it's not predictable, and everything is interdependent on society and economy, right? So basically what we've talked about as the future of work 2 years ago it's now, right? And we're probably calling it the new norm. So the future of work 2 years ago, it's what we call the new norm now. So I think that, it's really about helping them navigate through this crisis, because as leaders, I've had actually a chat with my chief people officer, and what he said is he found challenging was, having to make fast decision on less than 100% of the information that they have. And with 2020, it seems that is even more so. The pressure to make all these kind of tough decisions on crisis management, on strategy, on bounce backs plan, things like that, with even less information, and navigate through these ambiguity. So, what we really need to help our leaders is to give them, tools and knowledge and skills and the confidence to really help to manage the ambiguity.
Yeah, thanks, Adeline. And I noticed somebody posted in the comments that they have actually bought a batch of the Change Leader books. So if you actually go to Dr. Jen's website in Australia, you can actually buy a team bundle or a group bundle. So if you are actually working with a lot of different people or a big team, and you want to actually build change leadership, it's a great way to do it. There's some discounts in there. So if you do need that, I'll pop that into the chat. So the second question I want to put to the panel, and I know I've sort of interspersed a few, so it's been more than 2 questions, but the next main question is, what do you think leaders need to change first as a result of that year? So what's the first thing that they need to change?
I'll jump in, I think we have to go within first, and the first thing I'd like leaders to do would be to, and look, unashamedly, going towards my area of expertise, but it covers everything, is what are my mindsets? What's the mindset that I hold about change, about my organisation, about the people in my organisation, my stakeholders? What are my mindsets about trust? What are my mindsets about capability? What are those tropes? What are those things that I hold? And I want to examine them and work out what my blind spots are. And then the next step is, and how might I get someone like Jen or Simon or Lena, our change specialists, to help me think more deeply about another way or an alternative path, or the multiple, because we all know there's not one path from A to Z. There are multiple ways. So what are my mindsets that I'm holding? And when we take that towards people and then gender, how might my mindsets be putting barriers in the way of us achieving our strategic goals for our organisation? How might those mindsets be interrupting, not in a good way, what we need to get done? And then how do I get out of there? So that's what I'd like, Julieanne. So let's really know ourselves well and those mindsets that we hold as leaders.
I'm just trying to find the chapter in the book, because there is one. So, Dr. Jen, which chapter is it about mindsets in the book?
3.
3, yeah. So Jen, do you think do you support Michelle in saying that's one of the things leaders need to change first, or do you have a different first that leaders need to change first?
Yeah, I do have a different first, and I feel like it's one comes before the other. I think you cannot change your mindset unless you have changed your relationship with the concept of shame. And I think this will be relatively new to most of the people we work with, if not ourselves. But what occurs when we experience disruptive change, when things are unprecedented, when we're doing things for the very first time, it is really natural to feel that, clumsy, awkward, I'm not relevant, people don't like me, I'm not worthy, I've got imposter syndrome, all those kind of things, which bring with them shame. And our natural relationship to shame is to reject. And because shame feels really, really awful. And so we reject it with either aggression or obfuscation or those kind of things. Until you can be at one and sit in the discomfort of shame, I don't think you can actually change your mindset. I think that is a necessary precondition for mindset change. But open to the panel too.
Yes, I'm very interested to hear what the panel has to say. Lena, Ross, do you have anything to contribute there?
I'm probably sitting in both camps at the moment. I totally agree with both. I was part of the chapter 3 on mindset, so I have to say something about mindset and be a mindset protagonist here. I think leaders need to be comfortable first with the 3 words, I don't know. And I think that reconciles the shame aspect and not knowing everything with the shift with the mindset. Now, once they can get face into that, I don't know everything, and I think 2020 taught us that there's not one person that can possibly know everything, is that once you can lean into that and name it to tame it, you can also start to face into your shame, because you're starting to face into the emotions that come with that and what you need to let go of and what you're holding on to. And then to build on Michelle's comment about what to start to do with the mindset, I think one of the things we do is we start to get them to do a retrospective of themselves and a retrospective with their team, starting with things like what went well, what did I do well in the past 12 months, what did I do that wasn't so well? But the most important one is, what do I need to let go of that doesn't serve me anymore? And I think that's the way forward. And I'm hoping that brings together these two brilliant thoughts that came from both Michelle and Jen about shame and mindset, and kind of helps bring that together.
Yeah.
Go, Simon, sorry.
That's right. If I can build on Lena's great contribution there, there's an old adage, which is it's easier to act your way to a new type of thinking than it is to think your way to a new type of action. And I think that was a really powerful example in 2020, that organizations moved heaven and earth to send their employees home to solve the problems because they had to. They didn't get time to reflect. They just focused on the action. And I think what we all discovered is the crises we thought there were around working from home, around total digital relationship, they're not the things we needed to worry about. There's a whole series of other problems. And so I think that goes to, the point, which is, if you're worried about shame, try and experiment and see that it's not as bad as you think it's going to be, and then learn and adapt and keep growing your experiments. And I think that's really consistent with the work that Jen and Lena do, and to the point Michelle's making about mindsets.
Yeah, so Simon, are there any other things that you think leaders need to change first that trumps mindsets, I don't know, and shame?
I think, look, the one for me is and it probably comes earlier, which is preparedness. Donna referenced it before, which is looking, leaders need to look at the landscapes in which they're operating in. They need to understand them well. They need to understand not just the mechanical tasks they need to do. They need to look at risks and environments and anticipate, look around corners. So, I think 2020 reiterated to us that the leaders who'd done some of that preparedness, some of that thinking, floated through to how their teams had built capability in advance of needing it, those teams performed well. I'm not sure it's inconsistent with what Michelle and Lena are saying, but I do think that landscape is an important one for leaders. And it's as simple sometimes as looking to the near adjacencies. It doesn't have to be a universal, strategic survey. It can just be looking around the next corner.
Thanks, Simon. I'm just reading a question that's come in from Jeff, and I'm not sure who the best person on the panel to answer this is, but is there a danger of applying a certain type of thinking in the wrong domain? For example, just because we acted in a certain way in 2020, does that mean it's the right way?
I'll have a stab. I think there is a very big danger, and that also speaks to what happened to us from a neuroscience perspective and the carving out of new neural pathways. But it's also what we've been doing in the past. So, we have been using models of leadership and not shifting out of that groove, if you like, as situations have changed. So that danger is there, but it's the danger we have lived now always from a leadership perspective of you learn one way of leading, and then, if your only tool is a hammer, everything is a nail. And so it's a really good wake-up call to, and I think, Simon, you called it out, the preparedness, and we heard it in the OODA loop. And, having a conversation yesterday with a very smart leader who may or may not be on this call about the value of just sitting and observing before action. That's so valuable to us, because that's the time when we sort out actually what is fit for purpose, where is the value.
Yeah. Thanks, Jen. We've still got two more panellists I want to ask that question to, but I also invite you to submit your questions in the chat, or if you prefer to actually speak your question at a point soon, I'll give you the opportunity to do that. But I'm going to throw to Adeline and ask Adeline for your view on what do you think leaders need to change first as a result of 2020?
I think 2020, with everything that was so chaotic and crazy going on, it has just shown us that it's just absolutely urgent and necessary, not just desirable, to humanize leadership. So for me, the biggest thing is really, how do you put care, in the middle of your leadership? So, I've never heard the terms well-being or mental health or psychosocial risk used so frequently and with so much gravity in the workplace before, apart from 2020, right? And there have been so many recent surveys and statistics. I think there's one big one by Gartner saying that, up to 29% of the workforce are going through some kind of depression or anxiety, right? So, in this midst of a chaos, like, people are just really concerned about health and safety. They're concerned about, the virus. They're concerned about job security, finances, things that are going on at work, right? So with all these going on, I'm actually hardly surprised at all these high figures of people experiencing depression and anxiety. So with this going on in the background, I think for us to really think about things like, what does that do to productivity? What does that do to performance or engagement? What does that do to competitive advantage or disruptive innovation and things like that, if we can't get the basics foundational thing of having people in the right mindset, feeling safe, calm, and being able to move forward with it. So I think one of the biggest lessons or the biggest change that we can do as leaders is really, how do we really focus on putting care, into the center of our leadership.
Thanks, Adeline. And finally, I'll throw to Donna on what do you think leaders need to change first? Donna.
I'm going to sound like a real board member when I say this, but I'm going to talk about systems and risk. So we often in boards, think about organisations as like a system, and the outcome is a product and service. And if it's a good organisation aligned to purpose, we spend a lot of time thinking about systems. And I think one of the things we need to do first at the board table is think about how to use our very scarce time more productively, but both our time and the time of the organisation. And if I think about risks, there's two things I learned about risk management in 2020. One was timing is really important. So we often talk about risks and risk mitigants, but we don't often talk about the time we've got to act. And if we haven't acted by then, don't bother, it's done. So timing, and then these systems to sort of put these two ideas together. And what's struck me is we've got to be prepared for the future, and our risk systems have to stretch to be ready to handle disruption, although we don't know what it's going to be. We know that disruption is going to come, but we don't exactly know what it's going to be. It might be another pandemic, or it might be something else. And so the thing I turn my mind to, and I think this would be a good first for all boards, is to think about what are the actions, the risk mitigants, or the things that we could do that would be really helpful for facing into the next challenge, no matter what it is. And I find that answer at one level of abstraction. So bear with me. And so instead of thinking about the system that produces the product, think about the system that produces the system. And that's when I find change leadership is a really fantastic place to invest your time. That is a system and a skill and a capability that will be helpful in risk management, no matter what it is that you're going to have to navigate. And so I think that would be a very good first thing, and it's a very pragmatic thing for boards, because boards are time poor, organisations are time poor. It's really about what can we do with the scarce resources that we've got and the systems that we've got that could make a difference. And I think that would be not only a good first, but a very practical one.
And from someone in the comments, sounds like a good book topic also. So I would like to
I was going to say, your turn, Donna.
So I would like to throw it open to the people online, if anyone is brave enough to take themselves off mute and ask Dr. Jen or the panel a question. So you may recall one of the things is to sit comfortably in silence. So I'm just going to do that for a minute.
I have one. I have one following on from Donna Heights, Jeanette, in Melbourne. I'm really interested in your focus on the system that creates the system. So my question is about the time and effort, particularly talking about how time poor we can be. Do we invest time and effort in dismantling existing systems, and should that be part of the planning, or do we sort of just push them to the side and create new systems? Because I think there is much that needs to be done to dismantle traditional systems, and I'm not sure that disruption and the VUCA environment gives us time to do that adequately.
I could answer your question, but normally I'd pick up the phone and call the guru. So I'm going to throw to Jen.
Go for it, Jen.
Oh, look, that's just low, Donna.
I'm happy to have a go, but you'll do better.
Well, no, I actually do think we need your role in it, because I think for me, it comes down to what is the energy for breaking a system versus building a system. And given that there can often be a lot of inertia around breaking a system, or people really, really invested in the system that is already there, I keep coming back to this phrase. It keeps coming into every conversation at the moment. It's called hide the vegetables, right? So by building a new system, you've actually hidden the vegetables in terms of getting kids to eat nutritious food. So the people who would have spent so much time in focusing on why you shouldn't break the system don't realise that you've built a system in parallel that is far more attractive to people, who want to join and be a participant of the system. So I think that is a useful strategy to do. Caveat on that is if the past system is creating harm. So if there is demonstrable harm occurring through the past system, you just need to take a hammer to it. It has to be dismantled as quickly as possible. And there's a lot to argue that pretty much every system we want to dismantle is causing harm. But I think they're the things I'd be looking at, is to what extent is leaving that system in place while we build another one going to cause grievous harm, as opposed to, okay, let's just create a new future and people will gravitate to it. That was a tough question, Jeanette.
Yeah.
Donna, come back.
Okay, so here's I don't know if this is an expert's answer, but it's truthful, right? At a board table, it's hard work sometimes when you're trying to change, especially when you're trying to influence folk who've been at that table longer than you and often have more experience and quite welded in ways. So the very practical answer, because you get tired, you can't find everything, right? So I think the systems that are really counterculture, whether that's the culture at the board or the culture at the organisations, I'm often more motivated to see if I can make those work or gently or knock the edges off and work with the culture rather than against it, wherever possible, to conserve my energy for those things, as Jen says, absolutely need a rework. So that's the truthful answer, and it's really just about you've only got so much energy to throw at the battles, and you've just got to pick, pick the places where the cracks, might make a difference. I mean, the other thing to say about the work that I do is often it's not you that actually brings about the change. I mean, your work, you've got a contract, you're at an organisation for a certain period, and sometimes your job is actually quite thankless. You're just trying to push, trying to create enough of a crack so the person comes in behind you is actually going to make the change. And so, you're really always thinking about what's going to be effective and what's worth it.
Yep. Can I add to that? So first of all, Jeanette, great question. Secondly, I agree with Donna and Jen's framing of it. There is one point, though. Systems have immune systems, and I know in 2020 we talked about immune systems far too much and all became epidemiologists, but you do have to break the things that will fight you. If you don't break the things that will fight you, doesn't matter how good your new system is, it will be killed by the immune system of the old system. And the second thing is, if there are parts of the old system that give capacity release quickly, and meetings are a great symbol of systems, destroying the bad meetings and releasing capacity for people to do work on the new system is a powerful thing to do.
Yes, Simon, that's quite a practical example and something that I think everyone can take away today and just look at. What are the things you could release quickly? I asked Jen this question yesterday, and she may or may not want to answer it at a public forum, but when you've got leaders who just will not change, they're fighting the rest of the system. She doesn't have to answer it. So
no, look, I think again, we're going to come back to being pragmatic and pick your battles. In terms of, if you have so many of your leaders, and Lena and I were chatting to a client earlier in the week who's in a similar situation. We said, look, you're going to have to find a way to quarantine those two leaders because they are going to taint the rest of the workforce. Now, if that was an organisation where it was like 80% of their leaders were that way, then that's the point when, as an employee, you walk away. I said last year that one of our forms of organisational change we were going to see would be revolt. 2 weeks ago, a third of the workforce from base camp left. A week ago, all of the employees of the Washington Post went on strike and didn't produce a paper. So we're now starting to see real fiscal responses to leaders who are not changing and won't change.
And I just, Julieanne, I very briefly want to build on that because I think it's a really important point about pick your battles. And certainly, from the work that I do, it is about saying, there are the screaming evangelists who get it. They're up here, with no convincing required. It doesn't matter what kind of change you're trying to implement, particularly culturally. So they're great. You've then got the absolute raving dinosaurs down one end, and the resistors and the immune system. I love that, Simon. I'm gonna use that with pride. And then we've got the middle, the movable middle. There are people who are not yet convinced to go one way or the other. They're where we focus our energies. That's where we really engage. Yes, have a strategy for your dinosaurs, but please don't over egg it. They hopefully they'll go the way of the dinosaurs and become extinct, or quarantine them, as Jen said. But that movable middle, how might we engage those people who are waiting to go one way or the other? I think it's a really good point about picking your battles, Jen.
Yeah, and now I've just got one final question for the panel, and it's come from Gilbert, and it's really around, are we expecting too much of our leaders? How much change can we expect of them personally and over what period of time?
I can take the question. So personally, I think we do expect quite a lot or quite a bit from our leaders these days, especially in a crisis situation, which is why I always like to use the analogy of having an oxygen mask in a plane. So you have to put it on yourself first before you put it on to, your kid or your family members. So as leaders, I think it's really important that we need to really spend time to take care of ourselves, mentally, physically, as well as, in terms of how we work, before we can actually start to help others and try to make an impact there.
Yeah, so it might be that we're expecting a lot, but we do need to actually keep moving people forward. So Dr. Jen's book is a good way for us all to start. So if you have the book, you haven't already done so, please write a 5-star review on Amazon of the book. And if you don't have the book, we're going to drop into the chat where you can see both my copy and Adeline's copy are well thumbed. They've got little marks because it is... I'm sure they all have well got marks. So if you don't have a copy yet of the book, Lena's just popped in on the chat where you can get the book from. As I said, there are group packs and team packs that you can get on there. With the panel, you've been very generous with your time today. Is there anything any of you would like to ask of the people in attendance, apart from what you've already asked us today? Because I've got some personal things I need to go and think through as a result of our conversation today.
Please be an upstander, not a bystander.
Oh, I like it.
You can read more about that in my chapter in the book.
I did.
I think what I want to say is I'm blessed with the most amazing network built up over years and years of conversations on this stuff. Many of my network are tuned in right now, so thank you. Hello, everyone. I think don't be afraid to reach out, as I did when my phone wouldn't stop ringing in 2020. I reached out to Jen, and those people were reaching out to me. I think it's a really good idea, as you've heard today, throw the ideas out there, listen to others. If you're feeling a bit exhausted, it recharges you. So don't be afraid to Zoom or to pick up the phone and to ask for help.
Yeah, and look, and just on that, Jen does more than just write books, right? She actually is available for lots of different types of engagement. So she does a Conversations of Change coffee series for executive teams and boards. She's available to keynote speak at your offsite. I think we've got a little slide coming up. She does great collaboration and communication training through Busting Silos. And of course, as we've spoken about today, the Agile Change Leadership Development through the Agile Change Leadership Institute. So Jen, is there anything else you'd like to add before we close today's session?
Final words. I'm so very grateful for all of your time and attention. Julieanne, thank you so much for doing such a spectacular job. My panel, you're just amazing, and I'm so grateful for you. My greatest hope is that you take what you've learnt in this panel and go out and just try some change, be brave and change. This has been recorded. We will be posting these up on the blog at some stage. So for people who've missed it or want to catch particular things, but I recommend you connect with all the panel because they enhance my life. They should enhance yours. Thanks, everybody.